أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللغوي الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير الناصرين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبا القاسم محمد. والصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. آمنا به. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Respected scholars, elders, brothers, sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Being the month of Ramadan, I find it necessary to speak about the concept of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a concept that is repeated throughout the Holy Quran in many a number of verses. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about the remembrance of Himself, He says, فَذُكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَذِكْرِكُمْ آبَاءَكُمْ أَوْ أَشَدَّ ذِكْرًا. And remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way you remember your fathers. In the sense that the way I turn to my father when I'm in need. There was a time in my life or in our lives when we would turn to our fathers in time of need. We would look for their guidance. We would look for their protection, their guardianship. In the same way, I should respect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turn to Him with that intention, that because He is the source of my blessings, He is the source of my life, every aspect, every dimension of my life is in His hands. I should turn to Him and I should remember Him in such a way, the way He deserves to be remembered. Or for example, in other verses, He says, فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرُكُمْ. Remember me and I will remember you in turn. And many other verses in the Holy Quran focusing on the importance of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the idea behind this is, when you look at the message of the Holy Quran, when you look at the message of the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt, they focus on a very important reality, and that the human being is not someone who is just a physical being, but the human being is a composition, is a makeup of both the physical and the spiritual. Materialism, we exist. There is a physical area of our existence, but there is a non-physical area of our existence as well, known as the nafs or the ruh. And the nafs and the ruh are two terminologies which are constantly interchangeably used amongst the scholars of many of our scholars, amongst the works of many of our scholars. And the idea behind this was, just as how our bodies exist, our nafs also exists. And they have a lot of similarities between them. So just as how our bodies are strengthened, the nafs also strengthens. And just as how our bodies become sick, the nafs also becomes sick. Just as how our bodies can, for example, die, our nafs can also die as well. And the worst death is the death of the nafs before the body even dies. And so you find a question was raised, an intriguing question was raised amongst the ulama. And the question was, what is that thing which strengthens our nafs? Now, if I was to ask the question, what is the things that strengthen our bodies? The answer is simple. If I was to, for example, eat clean food, if I was to eat clean food, healthy food, all of these have an impact on my body on a physical level. It makes me healthier. If I was to drink, for example, water, rather than drinking many of the beverages that we find in the supermarket today, You would say that by drinking water, this creates a healthy body, and this makes a person becomes more healthier and more stronger by consuming such clean food. But can I say the same thing? Can I use the same principle and use the same thing when it comes to the soul of the human being? Can I say, for example, if I was to eat a particular type of meal, then this meal would have an impact on my soul? Think of it this way. There are certain meals that I eat. If I was to consume food which is rotten, that has an impact on my body as well. It makes me sick. There are certain types of food, certain elements, which if I was to consume them, it can be fatal for me. Can I say the same thing with regards to my soul? Can I say that if I was to consume a particular meal, that would have a negative impact on my soul? They say no, it's not how it works. And the reason why is because the soul is an immaterial existence. It's not something that exists physically. So how can you use something physically to try and promote the growth of the soul which is non-physical, or to damage the soul which is also non-physical? When you refer to the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt, and the Ahl al-Bayt have been very clear about this, they say that our souls are affected by our actions. So just as how food is the fuel for the body, our actions are the fuels for our soul. It's what feeds our soul. It's the energy. It's the thing that provides energy for our souls. If you refer to Risalat al-Hukuk, for example, of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, when he speaks about the haqq of the nafs, he says, فَأَن تَسْتَوْفِيهَا فِي طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ, that the right of the nafs of the human being is that you direct it, you employ it towards the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he begins to explain what is the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَن تُعَدِّيَ إِلَى لِسَانِكَ حَقًّا وَإِلَى سَمْعِكَ حَقًّا وَإِلى بَصَرِكَ حَقًّا وَإِلَى فَرْجِكَ حَقًّا وَإِلى بَطْنِكَ حَقًّا, is that you employ the rights of your eyes, you employ the rights of your tongue, you employ the rights of your hands, your feet, your stomach and your private parts. That when you direct your limbs of the bodies towards the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in turn what's happening is you are employing the haqq of your nafs and you are strengthening your nafs. In totality, the Imam alayhi salam explains that the haqq of the nafs, or this thing that strengthens the nafs in itself, is ibadah. That when I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah alone, in turn this fortifies my nafs. It strengthens it from within. It makes it strong and not weak. But with regards to the opposite also holds. That if I was to refrain from the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happens to my nafs? It weakens my nafs. It potentially kills my nafs. If a person was to starve and refrain from eating and drinking, imagine the impact it has on the body. The same thing happens to the nafs when I refrain from ibadah. When I refrain from ibadah, what happens to my body? What happens to my nafs? It weakens. It begins to disintegrate. It begins to fall apart. So when you refer to the ayah of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَتْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Is it not through the remembrance of Allah that the nafs reaches the stage of itmi'nan? That the qalb, the heart of the human being, reaches the stage of itmi'nan? Now a question was raised amongst the ulama. They raised a very interesting question. They say, what is the meaning of itmi'nan? Itmi'nan can have two areas, can manifest itself in two areas. There is something known as itmi'nan al-aqli and something which is known as itmi'nan al-qalbi. Itmi'nan al-aqli is when I, for example, reach itmi'nan through research. I'm researching on a particular area. I have something reaches me. It gives me knowledge to the level of certainty that now I am 100% certain or 90% certain of this particular reality. This is known as itmi'nan al-aqli. This form of itmi'nan, it interacts with my knowledge and my aql. To the extent that if I give you an example, say for example there's a musalla in front of me. I saw a toddler come sit in the musalla. When he got up and he left, the musalla has now become wet. And I saw this happening in front of me. I now have itmi'nan that this musalla has just become najis. But when you come and you see the wetness in the musalla, you can say to yourself, well, it's water, it's not najasat. And you can force me to believe that it's water and not najasat. You can convince me all you want, but will I be convinced? No. Because I've seen the child sit and I've seen the child go. And before him sitting it was dry, but after him sitting it was wet. So I know and I have itmi'nan that this musalla has just become najis. A second person comes and tells me that this is not najasat, this is actually water. Will I believe him? No, because I have itmi'nan that this is najis. 1,000 people come and convince me that this is water, not najis. Will I believe these 1,000 people? I say no, because I have itmi'nan that this is najis, because I saw it with my own eyes. I have reached that level of certainty. When it comes to the religion of Islam, for example, when I research the religion of Islam and I study aqaid the way it is ought to be studied, and I convince myself in the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I convince myself in the Risala of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, and I convince myself in the message of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, I reach the stage of certainty. I can have 1 billion people turning towards me and telling me that life is without reason, that life, for example, we've come into existence by chance, that there is no hereafter, that there is no divine message, there is no miracles, for example. 1 billion people can tell me that you're wrong in your belief. But once I've reached that stage of itmi'nan, I cannot be moved from my position. And that has an impact in my life. And this is what is known as itmi'nan al-aqli. Then you have what is known as itmi'nan al-qalbi. When I have itmi'nan in my heart, the Urafa, when they came towards this particular concept, itmi'nan in the light of the heart, they said this is an expression of sukunat. This is an expression of what? Serenity, of tranquility. That area of peace that the human being reaches in his life. When you look at, for example, Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Holy Quran, he turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Ya Allah, how do you raise the dead? How does this amaliyah, this concept of resurrection take place? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does he say? He says, Awalam tu'aman? He says, do you not believe? People raise the question. Ibrahim alayhi salam is considered to be one of the greatest ulul azam prophets, second to Rasulullah perhaps, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And he's now questioning, Allahumma salli ala and now he's questioning the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's questioning resurrection in itself. They say no. He says, Bala walakin tutma'inna al-qalbi. He says, I am asking so that I seek, that I reach that level of itmi'nan according to my heart. According to his aql, he had itmi'nan that Allah was able to resurrect the dead. But he wanted that level of itmi'nan al-qalbi. And it's a very specific expression that Nabi Ibrahim responds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. And what's interesting is when you reach that stage of itmi'nan, and itmi'nan can only be reached through ibadah. As we said, as Imam Sajjad alayhi salam explains, that when a person engages in ibadah, it reaches that level of serenity. When a person employs his nafs towards the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in turn, according to the ayah of the Holy Quran, it helps him to reach that level of serenity, that level of itmi'nan. To the extent that when I live a life of bala, and a life of misfortune, and a life where my life is full of suffering and unhappiness, materialistically, if I have what is known as itmi'nan according to my heart, then I can turn and I can be happy with what I have. I can be content with what I have in my life and not compare myself to others constantly. If you find, for example, the philosophy of the 21st century is what? It's all geared towards materialism. It's all geared towards capitalism. That success is viewed according to what we possess materialistically. That a person is considered to be successful in dunya according to how big his bank account is or how well his possessions are. But we forget the spiritual side of the human being. And this is what the Quran and the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt, the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt focus on entirely. That success is not measured materialistically, but is measured through taqwa. That if a person was to be a muttaqi, then the internal reality of the human being then this is what corresponds to what is success in dunya. And not only in dunya, in akhirah. Towards when Imam Sajjad alayhi salam speaks about the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says the rights of Allah is that you worship Him. Then towards the end he has a fabulous sentence. He says when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the best of sincerity and with the cleanest of intentions, جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ أَن يَكْفِيَكَ أَمْرُ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. He says that Allah will make it wajib upon Himself to give you what you want in dunya and in akhirah. Allah will give you what suffices for you in dunya and akhirah. وَيَحْفُظُ لَكَ مَا تُحِبُّ مِنْهَا. And He will guard it for you. Whatever you love in dunya and akhirah, Allah will give it to you. But that stems from the act of worship. That we have to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we need to worship Him. And this is something that is mentioned throughout the Holy Quran. When you ask the question, many people raise the question surrounding this particular verse, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, says, مَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I have not created mankind and the jinn except that they worship me. Many people raise the question, why is it that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In another verse, for example, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, worship your Lord. The Quran is ordering us, worship your Lord until your very last final moments, until you leave this world. That our responsibility, our taklif is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People come and ask the question, why is it that we worship Allah? What's the point of worship? I know for a fact that Allah is Al-Malik, Al-Jabbar. Yes, my worship does not strengthen Him. My lack of worship towards Him does not even weaken Him, not an iota. So why do I worship Him? When I ask this question, but when I have this understanding that worship is that the core, the essence of worship is that which strengthens me, it strengthens my nafs. I'm not asking questions as to why ibadah is necessary for my life or why Allah is in need for ibadah. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in need of my ibadah. I'm now saying to myself, and I'm convinced by saying this, I'm saying subhanallah that Allah has created me and that He has made me a Muslim, follower of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. He not only has He given me life, but He has given me the secrets of the success of life. That He has allowed me to understand that by worshipping Him, it does not affect Him, but it affects me. It strengthens me in my heart. It gives me serenity. It gives me peace. It gives me happiness. People yearn for happiness in dunya. When you ask any human being, what is it that you want in life? The answer is happiness. But this happiness manifests itself in many ways. You ask, for example, a person who is a businessman, what is the manifestations of happiness? He will say a successful business. You ask a youth, for example, who is struggling in certain areas of his life, what is happiness? He will say, marriage is happiness for me. When you ask a married couple, what is happiness for you? They will say, happiness is when I have a strong marriage and when I have children. When a person who has children and has been married for decades, you ask him, what is happiness for you? He says, happiness for me is when I have grandchildren. So happiness manifests itself in many ways. But this is something, a commonality that we have between all human beings, that we all yearn for happiness. Happiness can come only from ibadah. And this is something that has been repeated throughout the Holy Quran. That when a person engages in ibadah, it strengthens him from within. It allows this person to be able to fortify his nafs. To the extent that when the entire world shakes, this person is standing in his position. Not only is this person standing in his position, but people will come towards him and seek security from him as well. This is what is known as istiqamah. That we recite in Surah Al-Fatiha. What do we recite? Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Keep us on a path that is secure. Keep us on a path that gives us that security that we yearn for in dunya. And likewise, the formula of success is what? Ibadah. Ibadah brings about serenity. It brings about itma'anan al-qalb. But then at the same time, a person who refuses ibadah, that brings about what? That brings about ma'ishatan dhanka. وَمَنْ يَعْرَضْ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً dhanka. It brings about a life of sorrow, a life of misery, a life where happiness is stripped away from this particular type of life. A life in which people are grieved. A life in which people are depressed and people suffer from anxiety. Ma'ishatan dhanka is when life is squeezed, when the body is squeezed, that is what is known as dhanka. When life in itself is constrained. You can have everything in the world. You can have the biggest mansions, you can have the nicest of cars, you can have the biggest of accounts. But life from within, the nafs, the life of the nafs, it becomes constrained. You know, when you squeeze someone and you squeeze their chest, it becomes hard for them to breathe, doesn't it? But imagine squeezing them to a level where they can breathe just enough to survive. It becomes very uncomfortable, but you survive, you're still living. Life becomes that way. That a person, he is indeed walking on the face of this earth, but from within he's suffering. And you find the examples of such personalities are there within the Holy Quran. Many examples are given within the Holy Quran. Just to quickly go over them, you look at the example of Fir'aun, you look at the example of Nimrud. They owned a big majority part of the world. They were able to control the lives of others around them. Yes? You look at Fir'aun, he was a rich beyond the riches of his time. But then at the same time, he had only one dream. Or for example, when the soothsayers came and they gave him one prophecy, it shook his entire existence. To the extent that he began murdering what? The newborns. Hundreds upon thousands of newborns were killed under his leadership. Because of one word, because of one statement, that a young child will topple your government. Look how it shook his inner being. You look at the example of Qarun. Qarun was considered to be a rich from the time of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. He was considered to be a cousin of Nabi Musa. He had everything. 40 people used to lift the keys to his safe. It took 40 people, 40 men to lift the keys that gave him access to his safe and to his treasures. He had everything in dunya materialistically, but he had hatred for Nabi Musa alayhi salam. And he tried to ruin the reputation of Nabi Musa to the extent, what does the riwayah say? The riwayah says that the earth opened up and it consumed Qarun. He lost himself because, why? He did not turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way Allah ought to be turned towards. He did not remember Allah the way Allah ought to be remembered. And this is something that we need to remember in our lives, especially in the month of Ramadan. Because the month of Ramadan is known as the month in which ibadah or the rewards for ibadah are compounded. The rewards that we perform, the ibadah that we perform in this month, the rewards are multiplied. And it's something that we can definitely take advantage of. And the effects within the month of Ramadan are multiplied as well. So when we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that has a greater effect in the month compared to outside of the month of Ramadan. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to change at whatever degree during this holy month. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.